Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to help you choose which one of these two NASs best suits your data storage needs. Today we're looking at the Synology DS224 Plus, a 2023 summer release 2-bay NAS system, and we're going to be comparing it against this, the Terramaster F2-423, a very early 2023, maybe even late 2022 release NAS from Terramaster, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll know which one of these best suits your needs. But before we go any further, a very quick disclaimer there. Both of these are pretty good NAS solutions, but I think it will be fair to say, and you will learn this throughout the course of the video, that when it comes to the hardware, this thing is the absolute dog's danglies, whereas this one, the Synology, is by far the better software solution. And I think it's really important for you to understand, before we go even into the meat and potatoes of this comparison, that if what you care about is hardware, you are just going to love this. But if what you are looking for is software, this thing is going to blow you away. And unfortunately, this comparison, it's impossible to go down this route without going, into the reeds a little bit on either one of those subjects. So if that's what's the most important to you, that TLDR, you may not even need to watch from this point forward. Hardware, software. Second thing, we are looking at these solutions without any hard drives inside, and whenever you're looking at these and the amount of money you're going to spend, you're going to have to factor in the rest of the network equipment that surrounds you. So just make sure you bear in mind that as much as I talk about these two solutions, that your experience with either of them is going to be increased or decreased based on the storage media you use and the network environment that surrounds you. Hold up, before we go any further though, it's probably worth touching on that regardless of either of these, no matter which one of these do you buy, you are guaranteed to get the following. 1. Having a complete hardware software solution that you can set up with at least a RAID 1 for OneDrive failover, or a flexible RAID known as Synology Hybrid RAID or T-RAID from Terramaster there. Both of them have arrived with a multitude of applications for backups, as well as introductions to multimedia applications for photos, videos and music. They also have support for some third-party applications, as well as mobile apps and desktop client apps that you can utilize, although arguably a lot more on the Synology platform there. There's also virtual machine tools in first and third party available, along with surveillance tools, although the surveillance applications and services are better on the Synology. More on that later on. There's also support on Mac environments, Windows environments, Android and Linux based environments as well, and both of them arrive with a widely supported compatibility list of hard drives and SSDs that you can use on either device, and they're both 2-bays that are incredibly low in their impact in a local area environment. Also, thanks to them both arriving with Intel Celeron based CPUs, they're both great for Plex Media Server and other multimedia applications and server tools out there. And thanks to them both having Intel Celeron integrated graphics processors, it means things like transcoding, the converting of files on the fly is done very, very well on both of them, but again, to a greater or lesser extent on either of them that we'll talk about later on. But apart from that, whichever one of these two you go for, you are going to get a very robust and reliable compact 2-bay NAS solution, which can be expanded in some different ways. More on that later. But apart from that, let's crack on with the difference between them in price and value. So straight away, when we're talking about price and value, it's more than just the strength for the old wong you're putting down, but these two devices arrive at actually slightly differing price points depending on where you shop, and the amount of time they've spent in the market is reflective of their cost and the price point you were going to find at your local eShop. Now, right now, the older of the two, the Terramaster F2, there knocks around for about 340 to about 370 nick, and again that will depend heavily on the shop that you look at. So if you are looking at your eBays, it's not your eBays, your Amazons, your B&H, stuff like that, these are regularly on offer there. Also, because it's been in the market for about 6 months, you will find it generally in more seasonal offers, not just your Prime Days and your Black Fridays, but even just general offers out there. So again, that 340 to about 370 mark. Now, the Synology on the other hand, the DS224 Plus, on the very verge of release at the time of recording, is launching at about 359 to 369. Again, factor in your currency, your tax, your shipping, all that kind of stuff, and your tax, of course. And with the DS224 arriving at a higher price point generally, again, when you factor in all those price differences, still results in them both arriving at about the same price tag. Again, depending on what you go for there. But beyond that, when you talk about value, something we'll go into more detail in the hardware section, I would say, at least in terms of hardware value, the Terramaster certainly gives you a great deal more. And in terms of software value, DSM and its range of applications and services that we'll touch on later on does certainly put a little bit more in the kitty for you there. But ultimately, in terms of pricing between them, I would say the Terramaster wins, at least in terms of what you're laying down. And if this is your first NAS and you don't really have highfalutin needs, that value point and that price structure is still going to continue to be appealing to you. Just bear in mind that that price and value point, again, is going to leverage more towards the hardware here and more towards the software there. But I think we've tapped onto that for long enough. Let's actually talk about what you're getting for that money and back up some of those value points. Now, what do I mean when I say the Terramaster is better hardware value? Well, before we get to that, we'll talk about the new DS224 Plus. Again, arriving summer 2023, you would assume the later release would benefit from a lot of hardware innovation and improvements that have arrived in the market right now in terms of how Intel and other manufacturers within the tech sector refresh their own production lines. Sadly, in the case of the DS224, we've seen very little change since its predecessor, the DS220 Plus, arrived in 2020, in summer 2020. Now, because Synology rejigged and retooled their portfolio recently, changing a lot of where certain products fell within the portfolio, as well as removing some of the more value and entry-level devices in their portfolio, the result was that during that reshuffle, some devices didn't see as big a benefits as others. And whereas you've got solutions like the DS723 here, which massively benefited from that reshuffle, allowing better network performance potential as well as memory improvements, the DS224 saw some of the smallest improvements between ranges. Now, it arrives with the Intel Celeron J4125 processor, a quad-core Intel Celeron processor, and 2 GB of DDR4 memory. Alongside that, the system arrives with two 1GBE ports on the rear, and although it has USB connectivity on the front and the back, that is USB 3.2 Gen 1, so 5 GB USB. Now, on the face of it, that all sounds pretty darn good, right? Well, that CPU is a 2019 generation CPU that even Intel have largely refreshed almost 2 times now since then. And Synology seems to be one of the few brands that are still utilising that processor. Indeed, when you look online at the Intel J4125 processor, we're now seeing it used in a lot more budget entry-level mini PCs and HDMI sticks for as little as $150. And that 2 GB of memory is soldered to the board inside, and you can only upgrade it to a maximum 6 GB because there's one available SODIMM slot on the inside there. The result is that 6 GB is actually 2 GB less than what that CPU can handle maximum. You're actually physically restricted to just 6 GB of memory and not the 8 GB potential, which when you combine that with that quad-core processor is really disheartening. And also, 1 GB Ethernet on the rear has annoyed some users as Synology persist to maintain 1 GB Ethernet options on all of their DiskStation devices, only allowing upgrades to the larger 10 GB in some instances, not here, and the USB only being 5 GB and not supporting current generation and newer generation USB to 2.5 GB and 5 GB upgrades that are starting to roll out as little as $20 or $30 is very disappointing for 2023. Now, when we look at this in terms of hardware, the Terramaster is just insane by comparison, because remember that price point was largely identical. This arrives with an Intel Celeron as mentioned, but the N5105, a newer generation quad-core processor with better graphical handling internally and a better clock speed, with this one arriving at 2.0 to 2.7 GHz per core and this 2.0 to 2.9 GHz per core. It also arrives with 4 GB of DDR4 memory that can be upgraded to 32 GB. Now, the CPU officially supports up to 16 GB, but Terramaster state and certify that their devices will go up to 32 GB, and that is covered by the warranty as long as you use their modules. But even if you don't exceed that 16 GB, it's still 2 slots inside that allow you to scale up quite substantially there. On top of that, it also arrives with USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports. Each of those USBs are 10 gig transmission speed rather than 5 gig, and to support those network adapters I just talked about. Talking of network, the initial NICs that it arrives with, when these two here are 2 times 1 gig, again port trunking, link aggregation, SMB multi-channel are supported. The same goes for this, with its 2 times 2.5 gig network ports there. That is substantial as hell, and remember, you can upgrade with even more using those USB ports. Now, as if that wasn't enough, those USB ports also support network expansions. So, to put that into perspective, whereas the Synology cannot be upgraded in terms of storage, the Terramaster supports 4 and 5 bay expansion devices. This one here is a 6 bay USB expansion, which can be connected via the 10 gig USB here to add another 6 bays of storage to the 2 that are there, something not available on the Synology. Again, hardware, hardware, hardware. And doubling down on that, you may have noticed this system also has an HDMI output there. Now, they don't capitalize on it. There's nothing in TOS, the software that this arrives with, that allows you to take advantage of that HDMI. It's purely an HDMI output that can be used for troubleshooting. However, if you start to install third-party OSs on this, more on that later, you can then take advantage of that 4K 60 frames HDMI output. Finally, this system also arrives with 2 M2 NVMe slots inside. Now, these are throttled down to 3 times 1, but the 2 M2 slots in there, combined with those in there, give you 4 bays of storage. Those 2 M2s can be used for caching. They can be used for storage pools as well. So you can run certain applications and services from the much faster M2 NVMe's and use the hard drive bays for slower archival storage. Now, some Synology NASs have M2 slots, and indeed that one I mentioned earlier, the DS224, these 2 NASs we've compared in another video, that device has 2 M2 slots, and those M2s can be used for caching or storage pools, but it's not available on this box. And it's just another one of the myriad of reasons why, in terms of hardware, this Terramaster NAS just absolutely pwns it at that price, and it's just superior in terms of hardware in practically every single way over that Synology. But this isn't just a hardware solution, is it? Let's look at software on these two devices, and let's go flippity flop as things go very much in Synology's favour. Now, how exactly has Synology pretty much championed the NAS industry when it comes to its software? Well, 3 letters, DSM, Disk Station Manager, arguably the very best network software that you can get right now from any NAS provider, and Synology pretty much corner the market with it. Think of the Mac OS or Windows 11, 10 XP, pick your own poison, equivalent in the NAS industry. That's how good DSM is. But before we get onto that, let's at least plead the case for Terramaster here. Now, Terramaster arrives with TOS, currently in version 5.1, and it's better than it's ever been, and it's still very, very good. And if DSM didn't exist, it would do incredibly well in this comparison. It's got support of that fluid RAID system we mentioned earlier on, support of BTRFS and ext4, a range of applications there, a more modern generation Linux kernel in use than the Synology. It's very snappy, it's very responsive, it is relatively user-friendly, not quite user-friendly as DSM, more on that later. There are a bunch of first-party applications. There is an AI photo recognition application in Terraphotos. There's backup tools, there's system image backup tools, there's multimedia streaming tools, and support of third-party tools like Emby, like Jellyfin, like Plex Media Server. It is very good. There's even a one-click isolation mode there as well. We do have to touch on that Terramaster were unfortunately impacted by the Deadbolt ransomware along with a bunch of other brands, and they have since seemingly learned from a lot of those errors that were made in terms of their network security, and moreover how the system was set up, allowing users without warning and without strict guidelines to create an insecure system without the system restricting those choices, or at the very least heavily warning end users. So at least in terms of initial software, the TOS platform is good. It's just not DSM. Get ready for the DSM loving, because this Station Manager just brings it to one. It is incredibly intuitive, user-friendly. Two, very, very modern looking and feels like a native operating system in your web browser. It is incredibly slick and it looks good too. So much of Synology's finance, be it as a company or what every penny you spend on a device, goes towards that development of DSM, currently in version 7.2. The majority of the applications that you're going to use in a NAS, they've got their own first-party equivalent active backup suite. Synology Surveillance Station, Synology Office, Synology Drive, Synology Chat, Video Station, Audio Station. Just killer apps, left, right, and centre. The virtual machine tools, everything can run on this device. And if there is a tool that you use already, be it with your cloud, your Google Workspace, your Office 365, Office mail applications, communication applications, anything you use, there is going to be a Synology alternative built into this system. Now, you are a little restricted by that memory at 2 to 6 gig, but even unless you're a power user, that's going to be enough to run all of those applications very, very well. Just bear in mind that the scope for how many things you can do at once is a little less than you can find in other devices there. Now, alongside the baseline applications and the tools and services of this system, and again includes that Fluid RAID and BTRFS, there's also services such as write once, read MIDI for immutable backups. There's also support of volume encryption most recently, and just generally the fluidity of storage on this system with things like fast RAID rebuild and deduplication being built in is just A1 here. There's also all the client tools you can download for Windows, for Mac, for iOS, for Android. They are already available and updated very, very regularly. Indeed, they are one of the only brands out there with a range of apps and services in the likes of Google Home and Fire TV. You can ask your Alexa to play music verbally from the NAS. That's something no other NAS brand provides without using third-party tools like My Media. Overall, DSM is what absolutely swings this for Synology during this comparison, and again is what makes up a large percentage of that price point. However, I do think it's just worth throwing a quick bone to say that the Terramaster platform does support the installation of things like TrueNAS and Unraid and Proxmox and Open Media Vault. Indeed, a huge range of third-party open source or freemium based NAS operating systems that you can install on this, thanks to that KVM support and the installation of TOS inside on a USB that you can remove and pop in another OS and swap it back as you see fit. So we have done TrueNAS installations on these. We have done Unraid installations, and they've been incredibly easy, quick, within 10 minutes, and allow you to use a pre-built turnkey solution with some of the popular open source software out there. And that's something I think we have to at least acknowledge, that although the Terramaster TOS software doesn't compete as well against DSM, the option to install things like TrueNAS and Unraid definitely rebalances things a little bit. Synology still win this by quite a substantial margin, but it's not as a headlong victory as you might think. And on to our verdict. Unsurprisingly, you know what I'm going to say. Software, hardware, simple as that. It depends what you're going to be utilising your system for, and how reliant you're going to be on the apps, services, and just general operating system these systems arrive with. If you are going to be relying on those and you are buying this as a combined hardware, software solution, the Synology is by far the better solution between the two of them, because although they both provide all of those things in different regard, the Synology just does it better. Don't get me wrong, it's reflected in the price, because you can obviously see for that $350 to $399 price tag, depending on where you buy, I would say a good 70% of that money at least is being spent on the software more than the hardware, but when it does that, it does it incredibly well, and this system is going to be, of the two, the much more set up and forget of them, where it does its job in the background without you having to interact with it much. However, that does mean that hardware is at best lackluster and at worst fantastically disappointing when you look at it compared with what that same money gets you with 2.5 gigabit Ethernet dual port out the door, M2 NVMe pull support inside straight off the bat, a more modern CPU, more memory overall, but more importantly, the option with all of that to install other operating systems very, very easily that you may already be familiar with, and you're just looking for a more modest, ready to set up version where you're time rich, money poor. And for that, in terms of hardware, the Terramaster wins that side comfortably. I hope you found this video helpful. Remember, software, hardware, the end. If you want to learn more, there should be a guide link below over on NAS Compares where we go into a little bit more detail about these two devices. Alternatively, if you need more advice, the free advice section over on NAS Compares, the big blue button on the right hand side of every page, you can use that and we can help you out. Otherwise, there's the free community forum, Ask NAS Compares, or our Discord where we'll answer your questions, or you can find out more information about NAS in general. Lastly, if you have found this video helpful, and if you were going to shop at the likes of B&H, Newegg, Scan, Box, Amazon, please use the links in the description to take you to those stores. Again, only if those two things are true. Because if you use those links, it costs you nothing extra. And when you do get there, anything you buy, and I mean anything, will result in a small sum of money coming from those shops to me and Eddie here at NAS Compares. And it allows us to keep doing what we do, and it allows you to positively support content creators incredibly passively. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.